Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie. I'm with the programming department here at Woodbridge Library. Thank you all for attending tonight's event, a talk with author Katie Edwards. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to check out our other upcoming events. You can go to our website at www.woodbridgelibrary.org, and you can click on the calendar there to see everything and to register. I'd also like to remind you that we're starting out with everyone on mute so we can keep the focus on our speaker. Once he's finished talking for a bit, we'll open it up to Q&A. If you'd like, you can put your questions in the chat, or you can ask to, if you let me know, we can unmute you and we'll do it one at a time just so it's not overwhelming. Yeah, so today I would like to welcome our speaker, Katie Edwards. Katie is the author of the fantastic queer urban fantasy series, The Tarot Sequence. And Katie, thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to have you tonight. And I am going to turn it over to you now.
Excellent. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Not only has the library been just as professional as any organization I've worked with getting ready for this, and so kind and so generous with their praise and setting it up. I've really am excited to be here, and on the first day of Pride too, which means so much to me. And beyond that, I'm pretty sure that some of the people joining this meeting are people I might be interacting with on a regular basis on social media, which is also just an absolute joy. So I just want to welcome all of you. You can call me Keith or KD. My pen name is Katie Edwards, and I publish a urban fantasy series called The Tarot Sequence, which reimagines a modern day Atlantis set in our world as we know it, but with technology and magic working side by side. It started out to be an ambitious project for me. I knew in the beginning I wanted to publish a long series. I knew in the beginning it was going to be incredibly deep world building, with not even possible to tell in one novel, that this was certainly going to be a series I was creating. And when I went to my agent with the first book, I told her I wanted it to be the first in a 9-novel series. And not only that, by the time the first book was published, I have every book worked out, and more or less a rough outline for everything else coming ahead of me. So this is something that I spent years plotting before I finally took the scary jump that a lot of writers take and found an agent. And when I did find an agent, everything was a dream after that. I mean, I had a really lucky story. I had just a wonderful agent, connected with an incredible editor at Pyre, a science fiction imprint, now owned by Start Media. They bought my first 2 books, and since then I've extended the contract for another 2 books. So I'm already under contract for the next book beyond the one you haven't even seen, which I finished writing, but they're now trying to figure out a publication date. As I talked about, this is an urban fantasy series. Urban fantasy meaning it takes the world as we know it, but it adds supernatural elements into it. There's a heavy emphasis on gay and lesbian plus spectrum characters, and growing because of my own journey and my own education and what diversity really means, which is something I'll probably talk about tonight because it's one of those topics I feel incredibly passionate about. But the journey that I've been on, and the one that my readers have taken me on, beyond not even just exploring these characters that I'm trying to create, the ones that the readers are responding to the most, the readers coming to me and saying they want stronger female representation in my series, that they want to see more diversity, more racial diversity on this island. That yes, I might have had a bunch of, gay white men in there, but when it comes to diversity, that might have been impressive 10 years ago, but it doesn't cut it now. There's a lot more else out there, and my readers have been educating me every step along the way. So my series, in addition to being heavy on urban fantasy and having a lot of LGBT plus issues, also focuses on found family and how we create our own family, overcoming difficulties in our past as well. That's a really roundabout way to introduce myself and to talk about my series. They gave me a couple options for how I wanted to do today, and I am happy to talk more about my series. I love talking about the craft of writing. This is a passion for me. I wanted to be a writer. I don't remember wanting to be anything else but a writer my entire life, from the very, very beginning. Every time I think I remember what my first writing experience was, I remember something else even earlier that involved creativity or something, which was always pushing me in this direction. I love talking about the craft of writing. If you have questions on novel structure, on what you do to move your creativity forward, the concept of, are you a pantser or a planner when it comes to writing? Do you plan your outlines in advance, or do you have to write by the seat of your pants? I love talking about those issues. Anything about the craft of writing, anything about modern queer urban fantasy. Uh, Really, this is a great time for me to connect with readers, answer any questions you have, and take the discussion where it wants to go. So what you're interested in. Maybe you're writers who are interested in getting published. Maybe you're just interested in the whole exploding genre for simplicity, I'm going to say, a lot of times I'll say gay and lesbian. Please understand, I am referring to the entire spectrum, even more so now than ever before in my life, since I've been, again, on this journey and developing these characters. But I try, sometimes my language is non-elastic, and I go back to terms the way I learned it. And if I do so, I don't mean to be non-exclusionary. But any questions you have around me or my series, I just love starting a discussion and diving into it. I found that usually there's a fair amount of interest in writing or books because you're here. Even the state of modern television and cinema are things I love talking about. Science fiction in particular is a huge part of my life. It's almost everything I read or watch on TV tends to revolve around it. Maybe as a response to, it's a nice getaway from the world as we know it. I try to make my novels a bit of an escape as well. Not just adventure and thrilling stuff, but also the love between the found family members. I want you to spend time with my characters, not just turn a page and read a story. I want these characters to live in your head too, like they live in mine. And I love talking about that as well. That's an overview of me. I'm happy to start with taking questions. And if questions are plentiful and I need to push us in a direction, I will. But shoot, right now, if you've got questions for me, I've been excited to talk to you.
If anyone does have any questions, you can raise your hand or just send me a message and I can unmute you, or you can put it in the chat if you don't want to talk out loud, and I'm happy to read it off for you. I saw some hands earlier, but they went away. Oh, here's one. How did you figure out the orientation of your various characters?
I love that question because it's part of my own journey as well. I said when I started this, here I thought I was the absolute king of diversity. Right there even proves my problem by using the phrase king of diversity. But I thought I was literally embodying diversity by having this novel filled with all these gay men in there, and come to find out that even my own experience with the spectrum of sexuality and identity in my community was so limited. There was so much I needed to know. Not only that, but even the beautiful thing about words and labels, sometimes labels gets a bad rap, but every now and then it takes a single word and conveys a complex series of emotions or ideas and identity of who we are as a community. I didn't really know what asexual meant. I didn't know what gray asexual meant. I didn't know what demisexual meant. These were terms I learned along the way, and lo and behold, not only did they apply to my characters when I learned more about this, but in some cases they apply to me. They explain my life, things in which maybe I'd always thought that I was different or broken, even beyond being in a marginalized community. But even within that community, feeling like I necessarily didn't belong, I'm now learning a little bit more about what that means, and that I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm in a very proud company when it comes to how I would describe my own sexuality. And my readers are teaching me that. So I learned this phrase such as demisexuality, which heavily involves someone with someone who is having, or someone who really, before they commit to someone, there needs to be a serious reservoir of trust. There needs to be absolute trust and discretion and confidentiality before a relationship is formed or intimacy proceeds. And that's Rune. That's my character, the main character of my series. It starts when he's in his mid 30s. Atlanteans are a race that age slowly. So that's equivalent to, say, mid to late 20s in human years. And 20 years ago, my main character experienced a night in which his court fell. He's the prince of a ruined court, the Sun Throne. My entire series has power centers in the city of New Atlantis based around the major arcana and tarot decks. One of the major arcana cards is a sun card, and This is the last prince of the Sun Throne, Rune. And Rune had, when his court fell, he was kept kidnapped for a night. And this is a trigger warning, by the way, because I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it was a night in which he was extremely physically abused and tortured. It was a night that left scars and consequences in his head. And the more I learn about types of identity, demisexual just applies to Rune. Rune's not someone who's going to jump around from relationship to relationship. He's going to need that investment of safety before he moves on. And then I learned more about asexuality, and I realized I was creating this character called Quinn. And Quinn embodied, I think, maybe some of my views on sexuality, but certainly the way I was creating his character, he was just a natural fit for being ace. And beyond that, I started out thinking that the most, this was a society where New Atlantis, where everything was very gender fluid. I didn't want to use the words gay or straight. I wanted everyone to be on a spectrum. But even learning how rich that spectrum is over the last 3 years has changed, if not the path I imagine for some of my characters, the way I describe them, the way I let my readers associate with them, giving all my readers a mirror that they can see their reflection in as well. That's really important to me. I don't imagine an audience of people who look like me, which means I need to be respectful for all of my readers. I want them to find something in the story that they really associate with. So figuring out that orientation, really, it's been a goal over the last couple of years, and really things are starting to cement now. And I would expect to see in novels 3, 4, and 5, you're going to see a lot more of that, especially around Quinn and his development of embracing being asexual. I can just go on with the questions I'm saying if you want.
Sure. Yeah, we got a bunch more.
Okay.
So Rachel has 2 here. The first one is, why tarot?
I think for 2 reasons. The first is, well, there were 2 things I wanted to do. One was, yes, tarot was, I want to consider it, I applied it to my system of magic. So I needed something around a system of magic that was unique or fresh, but people might still be roughly familiar with. And I've always loved tarot cards. I don't think it's magic. I think in some cases, tarot cards are an incredibly meditative device, and they have a way of throwing keywords out, and whatever they connect with in your brain is obviously something really important to you, and you're able to draw a lot of conclusions about your own life. But it's also this really powerful and colorful way of describing human behaviors and human appetites, tarot cards. I mean, when you think of the major arcana, you've got death, and you've got religion represented. You've got the tower and the sun and the moon. You've got the Wheel of Fortune. You have these cards that represent different aspects of the human experience or human nature or human behavior. And those are archetypes. And all of my stories have always been based around archetypes. I've always got certain characters in my head, and finding out how they can be redressed for a certain novel or a different setting or a different genre entirely has always been a fun experience. And tarot cards is a lot like that as well. There's these archetypes that you can fill with as much creativity as you want and still make it your own. That's why I picked the tarot. The other important thing when I set out writing this novel is I love lost civilization novels. I love the concept of places that we've always dreamed of in the human psyche that could exist or once did exist. And what better example than Atlantis? But I had other things to fall back on if Atlantis failed, if it was too crowded a genre or whatever, but I was able to land with that, and I'm pretty happy about it.
Thank you. And another question here. Can you explain how you planned out such a lengthy series, and what do you do when you get stuck?
I think a lot of that goes back to I had mentioned the concept of and I'll probably stop every now and then and go off on tangents, and I'm sorry when I do, but these are things that I just love talking about. And pantser versus planner is something incredibly important to me. It's, some people sit in front of a computer, and if they don't have an outline, they have a trouble writing. Some people, if they have an outline, they can't write at all. It just stifles their creativity or their momentum. For me, I'm a planner. Before I even published Last Son, I knew what book 9 looked like. And it's really, it doesn't happen often. You go to a publisher and you say, hey, by the way, I want you to write a contract with an eye towards knowing these are the first 2 of 9 novels. very few publishers respond well to that. I was very lucky I had the editor I did who believes in the series, and to this day still talks with me about the future. But I planned 9 books because there are 3 separate arcs within my series. The first 3 books, readers get the suspicion that the main character Rune is keeping something from them. There's the event that the darkness in his past, the night that his court fell. There are things he's not talking about, and that's made very clear on a couple of occasions. And having the reader find out what Rune is keeping, what Rune is an unreliable narrator about, that's the first third of my entire series. The middle third is Rune finding out all the things that have been kept from him, all the mysteries and secrets that he's never been privy to that revolve around his past. And then the final 3 books are going to be my end game. They're going to be all end game. They're going to be the fun books to write, where I can break all the rules. And since I've got these 3 arcs, they come down to 3 trilogies, and 9 books seem to make sense at the end. I suppose if I wanted to, it could go down to 8, but I've got right now I've got 8 very distinct stories planned, with one of them being long enough for 2 novels towards the end of the series. I don't worry about writer's block. That sounds arrogant, but part of my process is that I do a lot of brainstorming in advance. So when people start reading, when you read a novel, the average sci-fi novel, for instance, is about 100,000 words. That's the average. When I start writing a novel, I usually start with about anywhere from, I don't think it's ever been less than 40,000 words, anywhere between 40 and 60,000 words of nothing but brainstorming notes for a 100,000 word novel. So I start with a pretty big safety net underneath me. That goes a long way to easing the fear of writer's block. And that's why planning for me works the most. I don't see it as stifling my creativity to have a very detailed outline down to the point where I have scenes outlined. So I know almost what happens paragraph to paragraph. For me, that doesn't feel restrictive. It feels like I've got this beautiful safety net that's going to immediately bounce me back up if I stumble. It's always going to put me back on track if I need to.
Let me see. Aviva has a question. How do you get from a general outline to writing every scene?
I'm doing it right now, actually. While I'm editing book 3, I've started book 4. And so I have gone digital. I used to put everything in journals. This like a stack of journals goes up to my waist, from dating back, 20 years ago to today. And it was a great idea and it looks good. It's like really visually and tactilely nice, but the problem is those notes in those journals somehow need to get in my computer, and it turns out I'm incredibly lazy when it comes to stuff like that. So every novel I write, one of the first things I do is go through those 10 journals or 20 journals and find the notes, because whenever I take a note, I usually key it to a novel idea, including with tarot. I'll have the number of like tarot 3, tarot 4, tarot 5, and I'll go through and pull all those notes into a spreadsheet. Now everything is dictated into a spreadsheet to begin with. Whenever I have a brainstorming note, it goes into some document, which is eventually merged into an Excel spreadsheet. And when I have all those notes jumbled together into this massive Excel spreadsheet of like 50 or 60,000 words, I'll go through note by note and start identifying what are chapter thoughts, what are character development parts of it, what are the different arcs of the story. And then through that process is where I am right now for book 4. The chapters start coming into, they resolve slowly into sight. Like imagine everything lost in fog and you walk closer and closer, and then all of a sudden you can see the full chapter in front of you. And so that's where I am right now. And then eventually all of it gets organized by chapter. Every chapter gets broken down into scenes. And before I start writing a scene, I usually actually have a document I call scene notes, which breaks down the entire scene I'm about to write. The points I want to hit, if there are any good jokes that I want one of my characters, usually Brand, to tell. About 10% of everything I write is a one-liner for Brand. And it works for me. This is a process which it seems incredibly detailed. It seems incredibly formulaic, but it reassures me to know that even before I've started writing a scene, there's a good chance I've got 1 or 2 or 3 details which I already know are going to be great, which I already know in my heart of hearts, that is a good note. That is going to look really good in a story. And that's before I even started writing and put my own creativity into it. So it's something that works for me.
Awesome. Okay, let's see. Kim says, I went to a talk with David R. Slayton, who I found through a recommendation from you. Kim says thanks. And he mentioned that you do pretty extensive outlines. Oh, and you did actually talk a bit about plotting versus pantsing. How did you discover which one you were and whether you go back and forth?
That's a really good, that's a great question, because I started off as a pantser and I'd realized that I'd never finished anything. I always ended up rewriting parts of it. Halfway through writing it, I always had a brainstorm and then had to go back and customize the entire novel to adapt to that new. I just, for me, that never worked because I hate rewriting. Everyone has one aspect of writing, if you're a writer, that they hate. They just absolutely loathe. It's like nails on a chalkboard to them. For me, rewriting is that. I put so much care to get to the point where I write a scene that rewriting it is just painful. So eventually, after all these years of novels that never get finished, I realized, well, how am I going to get to that point? You know, my life had settled. I had a good job. I had a relatively good paycheck. I was stable. I can devote more time to writing and looking for an agent. How do I do that? So I started out writing. I wrote 3 practice novels. 2 of them I never had any intent of publishing. They sit in a drawer. You'll never see them. 1 maybe, but I did that just to get better. And as part of getting better, I realized that when I have an outline, it's much better. And I can't, it's certainly worked with a series like this. I don't know how you could do a 9-book series and not outline. It seems like that just boggles my mind. Why? Well, first of all, the opportunities of having an outline, meaning, I mean, there are hints to big developments in novels, 5, 6, 7, that I'm literally putting in novels right now. So that someday, if someone really likes my books and they really read deep enough, they're going to see all the breadcrumbs I've left to the secrets. It's nothing that just came to me 3 novels from now. I'm planning for it now. And I always thought there's something rewarding about that in a series, when you go back and you read something and you're like, oh, they were hinting at this 4 books ago. Like, you knew where the roadmap was going. So that's for me, that works. Thank you.
Wonderful. I like this question from Aaron. Would love to hear more about how you developed the architecture focus of New Atlantis.
When I was on breaks at work and I would get bored and you'd get those listservs, you'd go on those websites and, the websites like 10 most craziest natural formations. For me, ruins. I love those urban fantasy or urban ruins, they call them. When you see those articles of Chernobyl, what the town looks like now, and there are places like that all across the world, and places with these fascinating histories, and they're covered in vines and moss, and they're still recognizable, but they're just kind of decrepit and eerie. And I thought, wow, imagine like a city formed of all those, and then it just developed from there. And New Atlantis is Atlantis, the actual homeland, was destroyed. And when Atlantis finally did reveal itself to the world in the 1960s, in my alternate timeline, the human world did not react well, and there was a war. And during that war, humans suffered a lot of losses on their side. There are 2 areas of the world which are magically radioactive and dangerous. But also Atlantis lost their homeland. It was poisoned by viral plague, and they've resettled and created the city of New Atlantis on the island that we know as Nantucket. And to build the city of New Atlantis, virtually overnight, they teleported these ruins from across the world and rehabilitated them. And it ties into their system of magic, because old ruins are imprinted with the memories of so much, trauma and joy and sadness and grief over the years, and they can tap into that as a fuel source for their magic. So it made sense of why they would do this. And also, the image of a city that it would build, taking all these ruins from across the world and making it the skyline. It was just something that it just fascinated me. And the backstories of these places, and sharing the best details of those backstories in a way that didn't bore the readers, was a challenge that was in front of me. You could easily look at those sections as complete info dumps, but I tend to get pretty good. People tend to really like it because, again, I try to focus on just the most interesting details to really bring a place alive in a person's head, and then they let them go into it and experience it on their own without you describing it. I tried to separate that exposition from the actual action of the scenes, and it's worked for me so far.
Great. And everyone has such good questions. Tracy says, I follow you on Twitter, and I want to thank you for interacting so freely with your fans. And I especially want to thank you for the free stories you share. Are those stories written new as they come into your head, or are they pulled from the extensive notes that you have in your many notebooks?
Both actually. They both. Every now and then I'll get a story idea or something won't fit in a novel and I want to put it somewhere, especially the one I just published. It takes a loose end from book two and it solves it, it ties it together. And it's actually something rather important, which plays heavily into the future of the series. So for me, that was a natural outlet for me to solve something I couldn't put in a book. Also, my books tend to be, I do try to make them funny. I try to put a lot of love in them, even in the grimmest moments. There are lights of levity in how they interact with the situation and each other. That's so important to me. Like number one thing, you have to have at least one thing that makes you want to laugh in a scene, for my characters. But the main books tend to be really heavy at the same time. So while I do try to put a lot of love in there, there's also a lot of intensity of what's going on. And depending on where it sits in the series, it could be, um, challenging emotions. I'm about to do the third book of the first trilogy, and there are some peaks at the end of it. It's so to put that lightly. But so these stories I do in between the novels, I tend to write really they fun, lighthearted. They develop the characters, and I just love doing. I fell in love with doing that when the Sunken Mall was the first one I did, but that's a standalone novella. That's really like a dedicated story. But as parts of doing it, I started realizing how fun it was to address and in some case correct or explain decisions I'd made in previous novels, or develop relationships more without stealing the experience you have if you just read the main books. And it's just been a joy doing. It's been a joy getting the instant gratification from readers who read it and say that it was an important part of their pandemic. It gave them an outlet. It gave them, a way, something to share with each other, something positive, something uplifting, during a rather dark time. And I did this so I could survive the pandemic. Most of these stories did happen during the pandemic, the scenes from the quarantine and scenes from the holiday. But because of the response I got from the readers, they developed into something more. So they have a home in canon, I guess you would say. It's important what happens in these free stories, and I do need to find a way to eventually gather it all together. It's not as if I want to make money on it, but I just want everyone to read it. I just love sharing these things. So that was a roundabout way of me answering that question. But oh yeah, but in some cases they're completely on the spot. Like one of the stories it was supposed to be from Rune's perspective. He took Anna to school where she was getting bullied by a teacher, and then all of a sudden I did it from a different perspective. A character called Ciaran, who is my Steen Sailor character. Every scene I write with Ciaran, even if I don't intend to, even if he's not on the page, something happens where there's a line about Ciaran, and I just lose the thread of the whole scene because he just like stops the conversation dead with a line that I wish I could say on the spot in real life. But so I did a scene from Ciaran's perspective, and I'm always stumbling on characters who I'm going to have to do more with in the future because they're just so fun to write about on the side. But yeah, it's a mix of both notebooks and immediate what readers are responding to, characters they really love. A lot of the readers respond to one of my new characters, Lane Dawn Creek, who now identifies with they them pronouns, and that's a journey for me. And developing Lane as someone who's just like a joy to write, and who started off as a he in the first novel, but Lane's development has been progressing. Lane doesn't get much time in the main novels, so giving these stories as an opportunity to talk about Lane and Ciaran and Corinne and a whole side family in my universe that's important to me too.
And I can, in the follow-up email after the program, I can definitely include links to your Twitter, and the stories are there as well.
Yeah, I would love to.
Let's see. So I have one here. It starts, yes, thank you for the stories online. Is there a weak point in your writing that you're working to improve?
My timing. My timing, not my timing as in the speed of writing. I I just wish I was faster. It's been 2 years since or what, it'll be 2 years, about a year and a half since Hangman came out. I would love, in a perfect world, to publish a book every 9 months. I'd love to do 4 books every 2 years, or at least 3 books every 2 years. That's a challenge for me. I have a full-time job during the day. Finding that, for those of you who want to be writers too and work during the day, you know what it's like. I mean, when do you find the time and the energy? You go home and you've got cleaning and you've got your dishes to do and your laundry, and how do you find the motivation to sit and write? It took me a long time to find the best times I could do that. And I'll be perfectly honest, I do, everyone wants to change about one thing, and then there's some things that inevitably you just can't change. The part of who you are as a person, and you try to work around those weaknesses so that they can become strengths. I actually do think I can change my pace of writing. One of the things about the pandemic for me has been an eye-opening experience. I am built to work from home. I just, everything about working from home for 14 months and not going into my office it transcended any experience I had in a workplace. And luckily, I do work for a place which is so progressive that they're even talking about, we are in 2 buildings. They're going to sell one of them and put us in one and let half of the people continue to work remotely, including hopefully me. Something about working remotely, it lets me write more too. Maybe because when I stop for lunch to write, I can literally take an hour and write. No 10 minutes of leave my desk and get to my car and drive where I want to go. And, then you're stuck with maybe 10 or 15 minutes before you've got to reverse the process and head back to work. So it gives me these little snatches of time for, a 15-minute break here, a 1 hour lunch. Even getting up in the morning and going out and writing at a coffee shop is a joy. Once it hits 8 o'clock, I just turn my laptop over to work and I'll still sit outside and keep on working. So this last year it's shown me a different way of doing two full-time jobs, writing and working my regular paycheck. So I'd love to do more because I have an entire secondary series I want to write, beyond the tarot sequence series. I have an entire other series I want to do, and I want to do it soon because it's a lot of you know this, but I've always wanted to write a magical boarding school novel. That is, I don't want to say it's my Harry Potter because Harry Potter is highly problematic and kind of breaks my heart to think of even now. And I don't want to go into that issue necessarily, but the concept of being away from home and living in dormitories and finding out who you are as a person and putting magic around it. I've always loved that. I love that. The magicians, all things like that. And I've got these kids in my novel. I got Quinn and I got Max and I've got Anna. I'm about to introduce another one called Tavis. And they go to school called Magnus Academy. And at one point I realized you put all these things together, and I've got a whole other series I can explore. And I've been taking notes on it for about a year. And I need to write faster because I want to give that to you guys as well. I want to share that with readers who are interested to see it.
That's pretty exciting. I have a few questions here from Stephanie. The first one, very important question. Are you drinking enough water? She would like to know.
No. And I do have a follow-up doctor's appointment, and I have a list of stuff that I'm already coming up with a counter argument on. Like water is one of them, and definitely losing weight. So as good as the pandemic has been, there are some things that have gone in the other direction. I think we're all beginning to realize what it's like to walk outside the house if maybe you've been inside it for 14 months. But the definitely, I am not drinking enough water, but it was a good question, Stephanie.
Okay. And the other questions are a bit more relevant to your books. So do you think The Hourglass Throne will be released in 2021?
I hope so. I really do. You have no idea how bad I feel that it took this long. That's one of the reasons I did the holiday scenes, even though it turned out to be something more. It turned out to be an incredible journey for me because I get to talk about moving the entire people to Sun Estate, which they've already living on Sun Estate, their new home at the beginning of book 3. So exploring that has been good. But I did that largely because I feel like I owe you guys something. I'm even working on a free novella with Max and Quinn, their first in the field mystery action, which I just started planning as well. And I'm doing these things because you guys are so positive and encouraging to me on Twitter. And I feel like, oh my God, I can't even give you a novel in 2021. If I had control over it, I would release it within a month. But unfortunately, you go through the editorial process and then you go through the copy editing process, then you go through the proof editing process, and then the entire novel is put together, but you've got to give it 4 months because maybe you have the audio version being put together, and maybe you want to send copies of your book out so that trade magazines can read it and write reviews, and usually they need about 3 or 4 months to do that. You start adding all that together and it just feels overwhelming sometimes. It's very satisfying when it's done. I am so proud of book 3. It's going to be, I think it's going to be really deserve its place as book 3 in the series. But talking about the things I want to change with myself, I promised myself you guys will never wait 2 years for a novel if you're interested in reading one again. But
Stephanie also asks, what science fiction fantasy books are you most excited for this year?
that's another weird thing that happened to me over the last year. I stopped reading. That seems really bizarre for a writer, and it is, and it's something I need to self-correct. But the way the pandemic worked, where you know how for those of you who did have were quarantined or you worked from home for a while, where every day kind of felt like a weird Thursday or Friday, like it just didn't feel like there was ever a Monday or Tuesday. And so I tended to watch a lot more TV, but not just any TV. You know, we all binged through our entire watch list in the first month, and then we were stuck with this huge desert of, well, what do I watch for the rest of the pandemic? And you have all these wonderful streaming channels now that have been showing international TV, and I've been watching so many international shows, so much international programming, seeing how different parts of the world treat diversity, especially how they treat gender roles. That's huge with me right now. How they treat racial diversities, that's huge. And of course, how they treat gay, lesbian plus issues is huge for me. But so I've been doing less reading and more TV watching. I am going to be fixing that because the books that I'm looking forward to are going to be, dang, I don't even know. I'm reading the ones that I really want to. I'm catching up on books like Laurel Hamilton has always been one of my favorite authors. She was one of the grand dames of urban fantasy. She was there in the beginning. She's just a master at what she does. Alona Andrews has been doing a new series. Alona Andrews is a husband-wife writing team. They write spectacular urban fantasy. Um, I even have a sweet spot for Nora Roberts, who writes under a pen name JD Robb and does a mystery series. She has like 50 books out in this mystery series. And I read all of them. I still do. They're one of my best types of comfort food. Kelly Armstrong is another writer who I just absolutely adore her. She's just one of these writers who one chapter can be nothing about a character moving from their bedroom, making a peanut butter sandwich, and then going out to walk the dog. And the whole chapter will be just fascinating. It'll be so readable. Nothing happens, but she just writes in such a way that it's so compelling to keep on reading. And she does a series about people who are looking to live or vanish from the grid for a certain period of time in this secret community in the Alaskan wilderness, the Casey Duncan series. And that's something else I always look forward to every year as well. And Murderbot. Love Murderbot. I just finished Murderbot. And also Gideon the Ninth. I keep on meaning to start that. Everyone talks about it. I know there are, I think, 2 books out now. I know I'm going to love those. Those are loaded in my Kindle right now.
Okay, great. And I have one more question from Stephanie. It's, do they celebrate Pride in New Atlantis?
No, I don't think they do. I don't think they do because I don't think once in the 2 books that are out, any stories, anything I planned, I don't even use the words gay and straight. I just don't. It's important for me. I just never wanted that to be a thing. The only possible time I touched on that was when it came to the concept of producing children and how the heir logic works with the thrones. That's the closest I came to talking about. Even that was just, that has nothing necessarily to do with sexuality. That was just more of a technicality. I just didn't want it to be a world where they celebrated that as something different. I wanted it to all be part of one whole. I didn't even want to question that with the reader. I wanted them to just immediately be immersed in that experience with no expectation that it was ever different than that or it will ever be different than that in my novels. But I love Pride myself. It's one of my favorite times of year.
Wonderful. Okay, and Jill says, your writing process is very well developed. I'm curious if you've written under another name previously.
No. I did no, I haven't actually. The only thing I've ever published before was my writing group. And if you guys have any questions on writing groups or what to do if you're a startup writer, number one suggestion, join a writing group. The right writing group. Find the right writing group. And my writing group we wanted to self-publish an anthology, a shared world anthology. So we created a post-apocalypse cult or community in North Carolina that takes place like 25 or 30 years in the future. And we each did a story within that world. But I did end up publishing it under Katie Edwards. That's the one thing. That's one of the first things I published, and it was self-published. Other than that, I've never been published. No.
Okay. Aviva says, Corby is one of my favorite characters. How do you come up with his antics?
You know, I love writing Corby. Corby's a 5 or 6 year old now. But first of all, give me a shout out to readers who keep me honest about things like how old my characters are. I don't know what I would do without you guys. I mean, literally, you guys are one of the best resources of knowledge I have. Some of you even created, or some of my readers have even created a wiki site and filled it with information on my series. You have no idea how helpful that is to me. But Corby now he's a 6-year-old, and I just from the beginning wanted him to be, I don't know, I wanted him to be a source of laughter and love and humor. I'm one of the few characters who had no baggage from their past, or even if they did, just had it roll off them, just pure, unadulterated kids' laughter. I wanted to bring into the series, and I had to be careful about that in the beginning because Corby was getting a little bit too much like, what's his name, Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. A little bit too clever, a little bit too cute, a little bit too saccharine. And I ended up making him a lot more quieter. And instead of saying funny things, he just tends to do what he wants to do and tends to cause a lot of chaos around him. And it's been a joy to do that. I don't know how I've come up with some of those things other than I try to tie it back to things that are going to be meaningful to the stories, such as by the end of book 2, Rune finds himself becoming the surprised owner of a prehistoric rhinoceros. He kind of had to be there, but it works out. And by deciding that Corby is going to fall in love with this 4-ton creature, or literally 7-ton creature, I have a lot of funny moments with the little boy and the huge giant dinosaur rhinoceros. So taking advantage of elements in your own story, let you kind of even deepen your own world building, but add a comic element to it well and develop the person at the same time. But he's one of my favorites to write.
Who doesn't love a prehistoric rhinoceros? Really? I have a couple more questions from Stephanie. Besides the Magnus Academy series, are there other characters you'd want to write spin-offs with, a prequel of sorts with Papa, Son, and Tower, or a Ciaran novel, New Adult Under the Sea with Kellum?
I will say this. Yes, there is Ciaran especially. I enjoyed writing that short story from Ciaran's perspective so much. I actually have a tough time imagining I'm not going to do something from Ciaran's perspective in the future. And other than the kids, who I know I want to do in Magnus Academy, there's only one character who I actually planned a novel around, and it takes place about 100 years in the future, and it's Corby. It's an adult Corby who turns into a Robin Hood-esque jewel thief in America, who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. So he's basically essentially like that Peter Pan type figure, the one who he never quite grows up. He's a mischief maker, but he has a really good heart. And I've actually thought about doing that because I've always wanted to write like a near future story about what America might look like in the future. But thinking how I could do that, I realized Corby would really be a fun character to do that with, to see what the future would look like with high tech in America and still having an Atlantis at the same time. So he's the one character I thought about spinning off.
Fantastic. Okay, I have a question from Rachel, who says, my mind is blown. The audio narrator pronounces Ciaran as Kieran. I do love the narrator though. Did you get to choose him, or was that handled by your publisher?
I think I got about 3 different demo tapes from 3 different narrators, and they asked my opinion on each one. And they ultimately, the publisher, whether Audible for the audio side, or my publisher, Pyre, I will say they have a lot of ability to make decisions on their own. In a good situation, they constantly ask your advice and you agree. But things like what the title is, and what the cover looks like, you usually don't have much to say over that. And the narrator, I didn't have final say over that, but Josh Hurley, the narrator, is just wonderful. I'm not going to fault with him how he pronounces words either, because one of the things I've been really one of the things I think is really important is that you're never, you got to give the reader some autonomy. If you want to pronounce a word in a certain way, I don't want to be telling you that's wrong. If you imagine a character's looks a certain way and I haven't really described it, I want you to be able to do that. I don't want to describe everything so closely that there's no room for readers to employ their own creativity, for them to read between, to even have a reason to stop to read between the lines and to put things together. So that's kind of important to me. And so what Josh does and the direction he takes, it might not be mine, on accents or things like that, but I adore him and I adore what he's done. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback I receive, hands down, is the Audible version and Josh, the job that he did. So I'm very fond of him too. I didn't, but yeah, CRN is how CRN sounds in my head.
Okay, wonderful. I just want to let everyone know I am reading out the questions now only just for the sake of time, but I can definitely send all your comments to Katie afterwards. So if you want to keep putting them in the chat, that's fine. I have a question from Rachel that says, this is horribly rude of me to ask, but do you think you'll ever be able to just write full time, or would that be impossible financially?
Probably. I don't know. Writing today isn't like it was, 30 or 40 years ago, where you sell a book and, you take 5 years off and wave the check in your hand. It just isn't that way. Advances aren't very large, and really, you just got to hope that, your what you publish has resonance and it gets picked up by enough people that you can keep on doing what you want to do. But to actually give up a job with like benefits and health insurance, that would be scary to do. It would be a full-time writer. Love to do it. Who knows what happens in the future? Especially if you ever, I do have a Hollywood agent, maybe she someday sells the Tower sequence. If something like that happens, sure, gladly. I take an early retirement probably and start writing full time. But it would be a dream, but it's something I don't let myself think of too much, because it is a bit of a dream. So no matter how hard you work, you still might not get there. But I think a lot of writers will tell you that they kind of expect that from the beginning, and they do it because they love it. They love this world. They love creating things. They love sharing it. And even more miraculously, if you have the experience like I did, where you develop a community and you get these amazing people who come together and they like talking to each other and they like talking to you, and they share about not just your series, about other things going on in their life, and they develop a support network, and they constantly reach out and they share artwork or song recommendations, or they check in to see how you are, or they ask if you drank enough water. There's, if you can get this in your life, it's, I don't need to write full time. Like this is more joy than I've had in years, what I'm going through these last couple of years, this experience I'm on. So yes, I might not be writing full time, but wow, is it a huge rewarding part of my life.
Wonderful. I do have one more question, it looks like so far, that says, do you read fan fiction about your characters?
No. And not because I don't approve of it. I love the fact that people want to do fan fiction for my series, and I, by all means, please do it. Have fun, go crazy, make your original characters. But I've always, from the beginning, I think I took the advice of Charlene Harris, talks about this a lot. No, she doesn't read fan fiction because she never wants you to think, what if she'd been planning that storyline, and then you shared something with her and it was the storyline she's going to be writing in the future? Is there always that assumption, like, would that person think that she took the idea? She never wanted to even be in that position where it looked like she might be relying on someone else's idea, or was prompted. So I've been very clear that I won't read fan fiction. I love seeing original art and artwork. And I do, for the most part, I think I actually share a lot of the creative process with readers. If I'm doing a character and I don't necessarily have, for whatever reason, a firm idea of what the character in general terms looks like, or their role, or what type of a person they are, a lot of times I'll throw that out to my readers, come up with a good name for me. Or, hey, I have a monster fight and I need something that can wield fire magic. Can you come up with any ideas for me? And every now and then I'll do that, and then I'll credit the person and their idea in my acknowledgement section. But for the most part, that's about it. I probably would never read fan fiction, no.
Okay, and I have another question here. How much research goes into writing a novel for you? For example, historical battles, etc.
It really depends on what it depends on what it's about. When I translocate buildings into New Atlantis, the ruins across the world, I do a fair amount of research on those, but that research is measured in hours. It's not measured in days or weeks. I would say the most intense thing I've ever researched for my novels has been the battleship North Carolina, because in book 2, The Hangman, there's a sequence on a battleship that's very important to the series. And I spent 9 months researching that. 9 months with literally taking my laptop onto the battleship North Carolina and writing scenes from my novel, following the path that my characters did through the battleship, because the battleship I created was a sister ship, a fictional sister ship of the battleship North Carolina. And that took me 9 months. I can't imagine doing that all the time. That's a lot. That took a lot out of me. But for the most part, yeah, every now and then I'll say that tonight is devoted to research. I've just got to look up this monster and come up with what are the real world things that people talk about this mythology, and what do I want to put my own creative spin on it. But it's not too intensive, but it's more than you think. I think any good writer does research about even the small things, like even right down to the wine choice they have in their novel, just making sure it makes sense. If they're not a wine drinker, for instance, they want it to sound like it's actually an educated detail. So.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, does anyone have any more questions? And if anyone would like to come off mute to ask a question or say anything, we can do that. Just let me know. You can raise your hand or you can message me. I'll give it a few minutes in case anyone wants to think of anything else. Just wanted to say thanks. Okay. Okay, well. Okay, so it looks like we can wrap that up. And I just want to thank you again for joining us this evening. And I want to thank everyone for attending. Before I go, I want to remind everyone to check out our website, and you can see our upcoming events. Yep, and don't forget to sign up for our adult summer reading program. It starts on June 21st. And yes, happy Pride, everyone. Also, don't forget to check out a copy of books. We have The Last Sun available in paperback and ebook, and we have The Hanged Man available as paperback. So don't forget to check them out of your local library or from us, whichever is closest.
And everyone, let's give a very visible, applause for Woodbridge, and congratulations with your Pride programming, and I hope it all goes well.
Thank you so much for coming. Like I said, I will definitely send out a follow-up email to everyone with some links, and I will send you the comments of the chat. If you have any further questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as we're leaving, and I can send them on to Katie and you can answer them there. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good night.